today we will be discussing about the lesson 8, which is the methodologies. But before we proceed, let us know first the learning outcomes. At the end of this lesson, the students can A. Discuss input-based strategies. B. Differentiate the usefulness of subcategories of input-based strategies. And lastly, apply the different strategies. So let's start. Input-based strategies. According to Bolithio et al. 2003, there is an emphasis on drawing students' attention to a contextualized target feature and asking them to discover its form, meaning, and use inductively. On the other hand, teaching ESP through input-based strategies is with respect to contextualization. In this manner, the ESP teacher will have to contextualize his or her ESP lessons in real-life situations or experiences of the students so that the students can relate and connect to the activities to be given by the ESP teachers. Okay, so I will show a scenario for you to have a better understanding about input-based strategies. An English teacher teaching a lesson on literary devices asks his students to give at least 2 examples of literary devices. Teacher: Okay, Miss Jeheria, give us at least 2 literary devices and explain it briefly. Student response:
Simile and metaphor are examples of literary devices. When we say simile is a comparison using like or as, while a metaphor is a direct comparison between 2 things.
Teacher: Excellent! You use specific English by using the terms simile and metaphor. These are specific terms that are used in the field of literature. Great job, Miss Jeheria. Give her a round of applause. Do you have any questions or clarification? Okay, if there is none, let's do this another activity. Direction. Write a dialogue between teacher to student that contains terminologies in your specific field of study. This activity is by pair. So find your partner and do the activity within 5 minutes. Okay? Okay, you may start now. In input-based strategies, there are 2 distinct subcategories that can be identified. The first one is premised on the idea that the input is sufficient for learning. And the second one is premised on the idea that the input needs to be followed by student output for learning to occur. Those subcategories are predominantly input and input to output. These are instructional strategies that relate to the way language learning materials and activities are designed. Now, let's talk about predominantly input. Refers to the language input that learners receive and process without necessarily having to produce language themselves. On the other hand, this is instructional strategy that focuses primarily on exposing learners to comprehensible input. When we say comprehensible input, refers to the language input that learners can understand to some extent with the help of contextual cues. In predominantly input strategies, learners are exposed to authentic or modified texts such as articles, reports, or recordings that related to their specific field of study or professional area. The purpose of this approach is to help learners develop their reading and listening skills, acquire a relevant vocabulary, and become familiar with the language used in their specific field. Okay, take a look at this scenario. You are an English as a second language teacher working with a group of beginners who have very little prior exposure to English. Your goal is to help them develop their listening and comprehension skills. So, one input-based strategy that can be used in this scenario is extensive listening. Extensive listening involves exposing learners to large amounts of spoken language input without necessarily expecting them to understand everything that is said. This can help learners become more familiar with the sounds and rhythms of the language and improve their overall comprehension skills. To apply this strategy, you can use a variety of materials such as audio recordings, videos, and podcasts. For example, you can provide your students with short audio recordings of simple conversations and ask them to listen to them several times without trying to understand every word. Then, you can ask them to answer some general comprehension questions to see how much they have understood. You can also provide them with short videos or podcasts on topics that are of interest to them and encourage them to listen to them as frequently as possible. Another input-based strategy that can be used in this scenario is extensive reading. Extensive reading involves exposing learners to a large amount of reading materials that is both interesting and comprehensible. This can help learners develop their vocabulary, grammar, and overall comprehension skills. To apply this strategy, you can provide your students with graded readers or other simplified texts that are appropriate for their level and interests. You can encourage them to read these materials as frequently as possible, without necessarily worrying about understanding every word. Then, you can ask them to summarize the main points of what they have read and to identify any new vocabulary or structures that they have learned. Is that clear? Any questions or clarification before we can proceed? Okay, if there is none, let's proceed to input to output. On the other hand, input to output refers to the process of transforming receptive skills. And those receptive skills are listening and reading into productive skills. Productive skills are speaking and writing. In input-based strategies for ESP, learners are given opportunities to produce language through activities such as discussions, role plays, presentations, and written assignments. These activities aim to provide learners with a chance to practice using the language they have encountered in input stage, and to develop their speaking and writing skills in a specific professional or academic context. Input to output strategies also help learners become more confident and fluent in using the language for real-life communication. Alright, so any clarification or question? If there is none, I hope you learned a lot from our topic today. Well, let's do this another activity.